Regarding the Star Wars Celebration releases, this from the leaker. You can just see the boys and men abandoning the ship. Zero learning, or is a correction on the way? This straight up ignoring of reality is fascinating. While you can bring in some boys to a girl's IP and vice versa, attempting to radically change an existing IP's core demographic can and will literally destroy the IP's equity. Okay, so when you hear four quadrant talk, this is the strategy that Lucasfilm has used that we talked about on the show on Thursday. When you hear about the four quadrant talk, what it's most often referring to is male/female, those are two quadrants, and over/under 25. Those are the other two quadrants. Oh, but there's more over at Lucasfilm and with Star Wars. There is also quadrant talk when it comes to racial breakdowns: Caucasian, African American, Asian, and Latino. I've seen this literally graphically quadrant with cast superimposed by skin color. The lighter skinned African American placed between African American and Caucasian, etc. There seems to be the expectation that the matrix of cast skin color will end up being reflected in the viewer racial breakdown. Who knows if that's true or not? Probably not, unfortunately. The Beyond the Trailer YouTuber, we'll leave that to your imagination, is continually campaigning for these quadrants to not be representations of the population breakdown, while she is particularly insistent about it on the gender question. She even talks about African Americans, or is it Latino, being the biggest moneymaker segment in the whole money chain. But that is totally wrong. Now, before I continue on with the leaks that we're getting, I want to remind everybody that these are market analyses. This is not based on any kind of determination as to which race is better or worse or anything stupid like that. Please don't fall into those dumb ideologies and treat everybody with kindness and respect. Here we go. The leaker says, Caucasians for Star Wars are the money, and it's not even close. I'm going to give you an info dump of some consolidated stuff from mandates that I and others have done. Not going to be specific, but cinema chains, shopping center owners, studios, including tickets and merch, as well as food and restaurant tie-ins, factor into this. That's a lot of stakeholders with a variety of money trails, with the main one feeding the intellectual property holder, either directly as well through rights and royalty payments. Caucasians have the highest pre-movie spends, and that's not close. This includes money spent at restaurants. When it's a family film, the trip to the theater tends to be maximized. Clothes, shopping, etc. There's a whole rabbit hole here. Families are rarely walk-ups and then exits without following up anywhere else. Caucasians are also the biggest in-theater food spenders. Interestingly, they are also those who tend to smuggle in the most. Now, that's funny. Women's handbags are well deep-pocketed. Winter coats are the most common vehicles. Solids tend to be smuggled in more than liquids. Caucasian families spend the most, including the extended menu items. They also tend to spend more in various peripheral games, activities, etc. Caucasians far and away are the most likely to make a fast food restaurant selection based on the movie intellectual property they just saw. They're the most likely to select a food product bearing the intellectual property. By far, they're the biggest total dollar buyer of entertainment IP merch, including the largest single transaction. This is particularly true of male intellectual properties that have the crazy per capita collector segments. Caucasians far and away have the biggest ticket buying segment when properly targeted or not pushed away. This is where Avatar, The Last Spider-Man, and Top Gun made their money. They are by far the most repeat views on male intellectual property, including repeat views on premium screens. They're the highest spenders post-movie, with African Americans being a very close second. And Caucasians the biggest consumers of secondary non-movie media related to intellectual properties, games, books, comics, TV, and otherwise. This is pulled from a long period of time, studied nationally for Lucasfilm and beyond. Many, many metrics are involved in this, and extrapolations are totally necessary. There is zero politics involved. Realize that demos today are inflammatory when men and whiteness are front and center as desirable from a financial perspective. Ironic, that's where the big money is for Star Wars, but also where the money is being lost because they're the least checked checkbox. And that is probably what is driving Mario and driving others away from Star Wars. There's nothing negative about reaching out to as many people as you can. But when you negatively impact or remove or reduce the representation of your biggest consumer base, then you have a very serious problem. And that is exactly what Star Wars has. End. Folks, there you go.
Now, we had some questions, Pro, in the chat. I saw a couple of those in the midst of the immense love for 6 out there. I mean, everybody loves 6. But there were some questions out there about the source of this information. Like, where is this from? Would you care to remind folks of where we have been imparted this data?
We have a number of major sources that we have used in the past. I will say that this is one of the biggest that we have. I don't want to go too far into this, but I will say that this individual has worked with Lucasfilm in the past.
Got to be careful. Yeah.
So we got to be really careful. They are tired very much of the way that Lucasfilm has acted. They have a deep understanding of the industry at large, and perhaps we'll stop there for now. But if we'll stop there for now. We need to be very careful with who this is and what they're providing. So there you go.
Yeah, and I want to remind folks, we're going to get into a discussion on this right now. We've got a lot of super chats backed up, but we're going to say this again because Pro has earned this, right? Pro has earned this with proven track records. In the last few months, Pro has scooped major stuff from 4 different major Hollywood studios: Lucasfilm, Marvel, Warner Brothers, Universal. Pro brought to you the news that based on the outlook for Mario well before it even opened, that they were looking at a contingency of the Nintendo cinematic universe. Chris Pratt, just a week ago, stated the words, the NCU, on a public interview. The Nintendo cinematic universe has now been confirmed following Pro's reporting. Pro also reported months ago that Warner Brothers was examining rebooting the Harry Potter series from scratch as an HBO Max series, recasting and everything to that end. And we just got confirmation unequivocally from David Zaslav himself in HBO's and Warner Brothers press conference earlier this week. 10 years of Harry Potter coming to HBO Max. Pro also reported weeks in advance that Hugh Jackman, among many other former Marvel folk, would be coming back as X-Men in the new MCU. That was announced several weeks later with the video between Ryan Reynolds and, of course, Hugh Jackman. Yep. And it goes on and on.
Then also we got the Zelda movie before anybody else. That was later confirmed by Giant Freaking Robot. We had the reboot of King of the Hill. We called Storm is coming to the MCU and specifically going to be used for Wakanda. That was confirmed by the Wakanda writer about a month after that, and so forth, so on. But just to explain to everybody why this is significant, what we're talking about is that there's a double quadrant strategy being employed at Lucasfilm, double quadrant. So it's not just male, female, above 25, lower 25. They have then taken this and added a second quadrant to it that is all about race. And then they are using quotas of race in order to determine casting decisions, narrative decisions, all this sort of thing. And here's how this works, okay? So to make this very simple, let's say that, imagine that you have a demographic that makes up 70% of your consumer base, and you don't have to represent them, that to that degree. But if what you do is you eliminate them to being 1/8 of a double quadrant system for determining how you're going to produce content,
skewed California demographics.
Well, okay, yes, and I'll be talking about that later this week because guess what else out there, folks? Here's something else, and if the source is out there watching right now, I bet you don't on this one, because on this one, this is brand new. I haven't told anybody this yet, but
go for it.
The Mario demographics for who went and saw Mario is it's not correct, and we'll break that exclusively. But anyway,
I'm not surprised. You know, Deadline magazine, and we always cover this with the box office reports each and every weekend that we do here when major releases happen. Deadline is very good, and this is why I really like folks like Nancy Tartaglione, who covers the international box office at Deadline, and Anthony D'Alessandro, who covers the domestic box office. They bring in the actual data reports from places like ComScore and CinemaScore, and from Intelligence that covers all this, that do the demographic exit polling. People think about exit polling, they think about like political elections when they do exit polling. They do those same kind of things with a lot of, you know, major cinematic releases, and they do the exit polling there too to see who's showing up. And I always kind of scratch my head, and it's like, I can't remember at this point how many movies I've seen that have over-indexed from a statistical perspective, like of Latin American of folk. And I'm like, that's great, and I don't have a problem with that. But I'm like, some of the numbers get a little head scratching. It's very biased towards Los Angeles and San Francisco markets, because this is where I think most of these companies are doing their data recollection from. I mean, so
let's just think about that. Okay, so let's say that you decide you're going to survey and find out nationwide what your demographics are for who went and saw a movie, and the only spot that you pull from is Southwest Arizona. Come on.
Boom. Exactly. And that's just it.